Howdy, all you delicious people. So, I'm here today to review Season 1, Episode 8 of Stanley's Lucky Man. The episode I've kind of honestly been waiting for. It's going to be a very, very good episode. Really, if you are kind of hesitant about going into the episode and you're waiting for this review to go into it, or you've already seen the whole entire series of this show and you're just going back into this as a refresher or a review or whatever you want to do, go ahead and check out this video if that's what you want to do. But this episode is amazing. Right out of the gate, it tells you right out of the gate of this episode what is to go on. So for me to kind of try and talk about anything in a very cryptic-like sense in this episode is kind of difficult, because right out of the gate, once this episode turns this thing called on, you're like, oh, okay, so this episode is going to immediately be tied to this one person, and this one person is going to be suspected of a murderer, and then Harry is going to have to scramble to try and prove, bizarrely, that this man who had done this murder is not the murderer. He has to prove otherwise, forcibly. There's a whole reason behind it, because if you go right into the episode, you'll understand why. Really, there are some interesting things going with Surrey and Orwell in this episode. It's kind of great that they, I had been missing some Orwell, but the last time we saw him, I wasn't exactly all that thrilled, to be honest. I was waiting for, give me some more of that Orwell. Give me some of that. I want to see some more of that. So we got some more of that in this episode, because we forcibly have to. But I like the fact in this episode we have Orwell and Surrey, and plus it also seems that Eve is doing something fairly interesting in this episode, because she has to kind of come to the rescue at some point in this episode, let's just say, because somebody might be getting some bullets being lodged near their bate, so Eve has to come in and save the day. Really, with this episode, it kind of feels like Winter is going out of his way to help out Harry in some way, and I'm kind of happy about that. It seems like Winter, we kind of find where his real allegiance is, that it seems like Winter is ultimately a guy that is trying to do the right thing. Yeah, he a lot of times does bicker with Harry a lot, but at the end of it all, I think Winter is trying, I like to say Winters, I don't know why. Winter is trying to do the right thing. And that's the thing that I like about this character, is it seems that all in all, it seems that Winter is going the path of well, yeah, sir, you did give me this, but if anything, it's going to take a while to have this really mean a lick of anything. And so Winter has this real true pause of, instead of really just Winter is really transitioning into a very interesting character, especially even in this episode. But it seems like his progression of seemingly slamming the book on Harry has kind of changed, and this kind of really shows that, especially in this episode. And I love that. I thought it was an enjoyable thing to kind of see a character that at first has been at odds with Harry is starting to unravel that whole notion, and just realizing that Harry is Harry and there's basically no stopping him, but maybe what kind of things that he is saying is also somehow correct, or somehow Harry knows something that no one else knows. And so I have to kind of give some kind of leeway to thinking I think things are this way, but maybe Winter just needs a second opinion, and that is just Harry just saying like, "Well, but maybe I'm right though." And then Winters is like, "Well, maybe you are right though." Especially in this episode. But anyways, yeah, what a great episode. Plus also like it kind of is to eventually help us play out what happens in the very last episode of this season, where like at the very last episode of this season we are to be like, oh, because like there's a whole momentum to something, and I can't say what it is, but like really seeing where this episode really goes tells us where the end game of all this is to head. And so yeah, this episode was probably like, for me, I think this one is kind of like my favorite episode, because like really like all the rest was just kind of like kind of connecting dots that eventually just honestly lead to nowhere, but like Golding just keeps on like continuing to come up. So with this episode, let's get into spoilers, because immediately there's a whole reason why I said like there's some things that I can't actually say in this cryptic like sense. So I skirted around a lot of things. But believe me, there's a whole reason for that. So immediately once I get into spoilers, I will let you know who the killer is in the very beginning of this episode once we get into spoilers, because really this episode was so great. Um, Especially even the second time around, I'm like, yeah, I remember this episode being so good, but this time around, like, it even felt even better, just because, like, I don't know, it just, like, hit me at the right time. So let's hit into the spoilers of it all. So let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we do spoil this episode. So spoilers now. So Rich, or Richard, is the murderer in this episode. Harry Clayton's own brother is to be a murderer in this episode. So we open this episode with Harry with an old-fashioned pistole or gun, like a musket gun or something, in Richard's hand, or Rich. I'm going to say Rich because it seems like that's the name that came out the most. So Richard had gun in hand, and he is to wake up with like blood all around him, and he is to immediately go and try to find where Barbara Hamilton is, or the girl that really Richard has been with consistently, with Barbara trying to figure out the whole bracelet deal and helping Richard and or Harry uncrack this whole thing. So Barbara is now dead, and so Richard is to go off to Harry's place, and so now like we have this weird thing going on where eventually Harry is going to realize that he cannot be tied to this case. Because all of a sudden, we have both Surrey and Harry who arrive at Barbara's place. And so Surrey is kind of giving him the 411 on everything, because I guess Harry has never been in this place before. I guess this is assumingly Barbara's place, because Harry would have said like, "Hey, this is my brother's place." So Harry is to eventually like start to uh, like look around and kind of see some things. But then they go further on and to eventually find the body, and immediately Harry's like, that's my brother's girlfriend. Like, I need to get out of here because I can't be involved in this case. And also, Harry immediately is like, I gotta find Rich. I gotta find my brother. I gotta figure out where he is. And so Shuri is to finish up the case with this, and so Harry is to make his way back to Harry's place, and that's where Richard is, just kind of waiting for his brother. So, uh, my eyes are a little bit goofy right now. Ugh. Because this is like the tail end of things for my day, and plus I've been heavily reviewing things, so my eyes are just blur. So, anyways, let's get into this. So, Harry takes Rich, and so Harry is to ask Rich like what led up to this whole murder. So Rich is to mention that last night, Barbara was to talk to a guy named Duncan Ortiz, and Duncan Ortiz was to mention some book to give to Barbara, and so Barbara had, I guess, had this Duncan Ortiz guy who was really excited about this book. So shortly thereafter, them like having dinner with this guy, eventually Rich is to have gotten drugged and eventually had this gun in his right hand to have supposedly killed Barbara with this gun. And that's all that really Rich actually remembers. So the very next thing is that Rich is to immediately go into being arrested to quite possibly being accused of this murder, and it has to play out like that. So Harry, of course, cannot get involved with the case. Winters is having both Orwell's and Surrey being tied to this case, and Winters is asking Surrey if she's fine with that because she realizes that like how like much like it's important for her to maybe turn to Harry at some points, and like it might be hard for her to be involved in this case because she actually knows Richard a little bit. And plus also Harry is telling Surrey, it's like, well, you know that Richard like could like barely even be a thief, let alone be a killer. And Surrey is like, well, anybody could be a killer with the right motive. So like don't even go to me with that. Orwell is really just easy enough thinking that this is pretty much like an open and shut case that obviously like Richard has basically the smoking gun in his hand. So here's the thing. Uh so eventually we are having Richard or Rich make his statement, and making his statement to Surrey and Orwell, and they're consistently asking him questions about things. We even have Surrey at some point even going in there and kind of poking holes or getting to the point of almost breaking a Rich. And Orwell's is like, you know what, good job. Like, I think we're gonna have him confess, like, uh, here shortly, because this guy is just getting like broken down of like just like he didn't do it, of course, but like, and also Harry is trying to figure out how to be able to make this not be Rich who is the culprit of all this, because uh Harry is to mention to Surrey that Rich mentioned that the gun was in his right hand, and Harry is to tell Surrey that Rich is actually left handed. And Surrey is like, what? Like, if anything, the gun could have been held in both of his hands, and he could have just woken up with it in his right, coincidentally. But yeah, like they're like eventually also uh Harry is going and sneaking back into Barbara's place when Eve is to distract this security guard that is by the room there. Eve is to fall over and the security guard is to go and check on her, And so while that's going on, Harry is going and sneaking into Barbara's room, finding a certain book of that is placed in this room, and going and having it being dusted for prints, basically, or like kind of checked certain fingerprints, because Harry knows specifically what exact page more than likely they had gone through and what exact book they had gone through. And so Harry is to mention a certain page to see that there is a dusting of prints in this certain page, and that certain page is to bring up a guy named Charlie Collins, and Charlie Collins was the security guard with Sasha from an episode or a couple episodes before, and so Charlie Collins is to be ex-military, and it seems like this guy could fit the bill for Golding, and so that's what kind of Harry is making the consensus about, that this could quite possibly be Golding. But let's a little bit. So while Rich uh, is to do these statements and all kinds of things. Like, Harry is desperately just wanting to comfort his brother. And like, there's some bits in time where Richard is kind of like being able to just kind of hug Harry or something like that, where like they can't talk, but like Harry is just trying to comfort his brother in any way that he possibly can, because it's his girlfriend's death. So Harry is eventually talking to Anna, and Anna is asking how really Rich is holding up, and Harry's mentioning like he's not holding up, like he's not doing well. Like, if anything, he's just like, he can tell that eventually he's going to break, and so Harry is talking to Anna, and like I thought there would have been like a really nice tender moment where maybe Anna and Harry were gonna like share a hug or something, but it just seems like they were like having this little like conversation about what all is going on, and then Anna is to ask Harry like, well, how is he holding up? So so we Harry is to go and eventually start to talk to Kaleem and ask him about if he has ever heard of Golding before. And Kaleem is like, well, no, like I haven't heard of this name before. Like, if anything, like if something would have came up, something would have came up, and it hasn't. So Harry is to just kind of like, dude, like I need to come up with this Golden character right away, but I guess Kaleem just doesn't have enough information. So immediately after Harry is done talking to Kaleem, Kaleem is to call the Charlie Collins character, and like Collins is to be like, well, like, so immediately after you talk to Harry, you call me in a public place. Like, goodbye, Kaleem. I'm not talking to you. And Kaleem hangs up. So, uh, so eventually, Collins is to get the fingerprints from the book, and it's to be Charlie Collins. And so immediately, uh, Harry is trying to take this to Surrey, and Surrey is like, well, how did I come up with that evidence? Like, how did I know it was that exact book? How did I know exactly? And Harry is like, because I know. And it's like, well, I can't get evidence from you to help me with this case. It doesn't work that way. So eventually, Harry goes over like Surrey's head to go to Winter, and Winter is kind of telling him the exact same thing. It's like, you cannot help with this case. This is not your case. You're emotionally compromised, or whatever frickin' Spock like language. You cannot do this case family, you cannot do it. And so, but Winter is like, well, F it, you know what? Like, maybe, like, Winter goes and tries to figure out, like, if there's a way that Winter can still pin this on Collins. And so Winter goes and tries to send pictures of things that had happened before from people that had gotten arrested, that maybe Winter can give pictures to someone that'll tie up this case. So Harry just blatantly just goes right up to Charlie Collins, or Charles Collins. I'm just gonna call him Collins for the rest of this to be safe. So Harry eventually just straight up approaches Collins and just says, "Yeah, I know you're Golding. Like, yeah, I know. Like, me here, knowing you, you're Golding. So, I'm coming to get you, just so you know. Like, really, I'm just coming. I'm coming for you." And so, eventually it gets to the point where Harry goes into Collins's home and starts like going through his stuff, and eventually uh like Collins is to also talk to Lily Ann and mention that if Lily Ann wants a seat at the table, she's going to have to kill Kaleem to do so. Uh, because like, and Collins like seems to realize that Lily Ann is having some kind of emotional connection with Kaleem, that it's hard for her to want to kill this guy off. And Collins is like, well, hey, you want a seat at the table? Kill this guy off. Like, he's a squealer compared to everyone else, so you need to kill this guy off. He needs to be dead so word isn't getting around. Because, especially after Kaleem called Collins, like, Collins is like, dude, I want this guy dead. Like, he's making a lot of mistakes, and if anything, like, everything's gonna fall apart because of this guy. And plus, also, it seems like Harry can go to this guy, Kaleem, more than anybody else. So, Collins is to. Uh, Collins is. Because the whole reason why Harry eventually goes to Collins' place is because Collins tells Harry to meet him in a certain location. And so Harry calls Surrey and says, hey, I'm meeting Collins at this certain location. Like, I've kind of already accused him of being Golding. Like, so heads up, I'm probably going to get killed here. Just so you know. Just so you know. But how exactly is he going to get killed? Because bracelet immunity, baby. So Harry goes on and is to meet uh, Collins in one location, and then all of a sudden he is to get a phone call from Rich when Harry is to meet at this location, and Rich is to tell Harry that the location has changed and for him to actually go into other location. And so Harry is recalling Surrey after he hangs up with Harry, because technically, like, Harry, or after Harry hangs up with Richard, I mean. And so, like, I think Harry wanted to try to talk to Rich to just kind of like see how things are, and or something, because Rich is now going to have to be in prison. Like, he's now in jail. He's in the same jail that Julian is like somehow attached to. Um, because like Julian is like attached to almost everything in this town. It seems like he's like the warden of this prison. It seems like he's the guy that owns a restaurant. He's pretty much everywhere. Like, he's almost like, it's scary how much Julian has as far as like real estate in this whole thing. Um, as far as like it seems like there's a lot of connections going with his character. But if anyways, I think Julian has proved or try like pretty much proved to Anna that like he's a good guy. That he's like Julian and Anna are having this conversation because Anna is like, "Hey, you know what? I came in here for honestly a certain reason." And Julian is like, "Well, yeah, I completely understand that. I knew you were gonna come in here and start asking questions, especially about Kevin Gray's death and how it led to where it led to." And Anna confesses, it's like, well, yeah, like I'm looking for a man called Golding. And Julian is like, well, yeah, I'm looking for him too. Like, if anything, I want this problem of Golding solved as much as you are. Believe me, I'm going out of my way to find this Golding character. Trust me, I'm going to find him one way or the other, Julian says. So Anne is to eventually mention, I think, that Daisy is to go on a sleepover somewhere. And so Julian is like, well, hey, how about you come to my place? Because maybe I'll get busy with you. You know? We can rock the Casbah, if you know what I mean? Because I think, honestly, like, Julian has proven to Anna that he is her white knight. He's there to help her out. Like, he is there to just say, hey, baby, let's finally just get into some bedroom business. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that Julian is a bad guy at all. Like, I don't think at all that he's a bad guy. Um, so, so now we have to figure out who this Golding guy is. I've seen this whole entire season, and man, that Golding guy probably has to be Collins at this point. So Harry is to go on and is to go into this, like, I usually call them like the ski lift looking things because I can't come up with any other words besides that. And more than likely, that is the closest thing that I can come with a description of any number of these things. Because they pop up all the time. It comes up in Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire movie. I'm like, ski lift. It comes up in the movie Frozen. Ski lift. I didn't review the movie Frozen, but it's not the Disney one. It's the other one. But I always go with ski lift, even though it never looks like there's any drop of winter going on and people have skis in these ski lifts. It's just the easiest way to just describe something that I hope people understand exactly what I mean. Like, it's these like little things that are going down this kind of path that are like doors open, doors closed. It's kind of like the merry-go-round kind of thing. But it goes into a certain path of getting from location to location. But anyway, so Harry pops himself in to one of these ski lift looking things, and so Harry is making his way from one part of this spot to the other. And while that is going on, we have Collins, who is to be snipering it up. And because Collins knows good and well that it's like, well, like, I know this guy seems unstoppable, but even a guy with the bracelet, like, eventually he's still, like, with all the luck in the world, this guy could still have a bad day. This guy could miss 1 out of 1,000,000. He could miss. And I'll be there when that happens. So Collins starts shooting into this lift that that Harry is in. And all of a sudden we have like Harry performing this like Wonder Woman moment where the bracelet, Harry just lifts the bracelet at a perfect time, and this bullet is to ricochet off Harry's bracelet to uh, uh, break into some other part of this window of a lift. And so Harry's like, oh my god, I'm being shot at, and there's nothing he can do. And so all of a sudden, like, we start seeing bullets start to come into this thing, and Collins is like, a fish in a barrel. Ha ha ha. I'm going to just murder this guy so freaking easily. Here's the thing that he could have probably done. He could have probably planted explosives on every single one of these lift things, and then just been like, oh yeah, that's lift number 4. Whoop, and wabamo, Harry would have been dead. But no. I guess, like, he could have waited till Harry got to his spot and detonated a bomb, and he would have been done for that day. But anyways, so Eve is to run to Collins's van and go and start beating him up to try to get Eve, or to try to get Collins to stop shooting at Harry. Eve is trying to stop him, but it seems that eventually Harry is to watch on as Collins is overpowering Eve and is eventually knocking her out. And I don't think we actually see what happens to Eve in this episode. Because I don't remember where she actually goes on to. But maybe if anybody paid attention enough into this episode, like, oh yeah, Eve just is gonna, like, we'll see what happens to her in the next episode. Oh, okay, cool. But anyways, so Harry is to chase after this van that Collins is to drive away of, and so Harry's like, mother. So because of what happened, Harry is deciding to go into Collins's home and kind of pick through and see things, and eventually text Collins that, hey, like, you should probably make it back home because I have some stuff of yours. So Collins is to be pushed back to go back into his home to talk to Harry, and Harry has evidence of Collins's gear that I guess he was to quite possibly have on that could have been tied to Barbara's death or Richard's girlfriend's death. Clearing Richard of any of that, and all this would get resolved. So Harry is telling Collins to get his bag and let's get going to the prison so that way he can be arrested. And so Collins is to, like, start to, like, fold his stuff and mention to Harry, like I had said before, that Collins is to mention, it's like, well, like, it's great that you have that bracelet and all, but, like, eventually, like, you can have all the luck in the world, but eventually something will happen to you. Because Collins is to mention that he used to, like, be in the army, and there used to be this one guy that used to take these risks, like, all the time. Like, he would go and pop his head out when he probably should not have, and he would never get hit. Like, this guy would, like, cowboy through everything and just, like, guns blazing, and luckily he would always just be able to kill the enemy before he would get killed. That's what cowboy upping means to me. Like, he would always just run through, shoot everybody, and he would get everyone and not get killed. But then eventually, there was one time for this guy where he would, again, as per usual, stick his head out when he should not have, and he did get hit and he did get killed. So Collins is making that analogy to relate to Harry, that eventually Harry is sticking his head out way too many times, and now is going to be the time where Collins is going to be the guy that is to shoot Harry in the head and kill Harry. So Collins is to go and eventually just knock Harry out with combat skill. And so Collins is to shove Harry into the back of his car and eventually take the evidence and put it in his car as well. So Harry is now awake after getting knocked out, and so, like, Harry is like, looking at the bracelet, just kind of hoping that the bracelet will win the day over. And so all of a sudden, we are to see Colin's vehicle get hit by this truck, and so Harry now has the ability to crack this trunk open for him to basically get out of this car. He's checking on the other car. It seems that they might be dead or something else. So Harry just kind of makes his way to try to get the heck out of there. So that way, like, Collins isn't going to go after him because he doesn't know if Collins is dead or alive. All that matters to Harry is that he's getting the heck out of there with the evidence in hand. So Winter is eventually getting the call that the picture was of this guy, and so they are going and checking out uh, and trying to find out like more about Collins and more about everything. So they go to this home and they are to eventually find a head in this freezer because Suri is going in there and she's like, oh my god, like I found a head in this freezer. And Harry is like, or Winter is like, oh my god, wow, a head. And then that's where the episode just ends. Um, but yeah, so I think I kind of covered a bulk of everything in this episode. Um, and so yeah, like the head of whatever this is, I'm not quite sure what any of this was, or towards especially the tail end of the episode. But Winter is kind of going on the fact that instead of actually pinning the information on Harry, uh, Winter just mentions that it's some anonymous source, so that way they can be able to get this case and do this case and get to more conclusions. But with that said, I think I am going to get out of here. I think I covered most of what happened in this episode. If there's anything I skipped around about, because there's probably a lot to also just unpack here, I apologize. But otherwise, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.